My mother sent a message to the family group chat, inviting everyone to an exclusive Mother's Day brunch at the Onyx. Everyone except me. When I asked for the time and location, her private reply shattered me. "You are not invited, Simone. Your sister Chantel is bringing her new wealthy in-laws, and quite frankly, your lifestyle as a lowly teacher is an embarrassment to this family. Do not show up." My name is Simone, and I am 32 years old. For years, I let them think I was the family failure. They had no idea that the lowly teacher they mocked was actually the most powerful woman in the room. Before I tell you how I made my mother regret that text message, please like this video and subscribe to my channel. Let me know in the comments if you have ever been the black sheep of your family. It was a rainy Tuesday evening, and my small apartment was quiet, except for the rhythmic scratching of my red pen against student essays. Being a special education teacher in a Title I school was exhausting work that often left me with stains on my sleeves and fatigue in my bones, but it was fulfilling in a way my family never understood. I had just poured myself a glass of wine to unwind when my phone vibrated violently across the coffee table. It was the Wilson family prestige group chat. My stomach tightened. Notifications from that group usually meant someone was bragging or I was being criticized. A notification popped up showing an image of 5 first-class plane tickets to Martha's Vineyard for the upcoming Mother's Day weekend. My heart skipped a beat with a foolish flicker of hope. Maybe this year would be different. Maybe Mom was finally including me in the family tradition. I unlocked my phone to type a message, but then I saw the names printed clearly on the digital boarding passes. Mom, Dad, my sister Chantel, her husband Brad, and even Chantel's poodle Coco. There was no ticket for Simone. The exclusion sat heavy in my chest, a familiar cold weight I had carried since childhood. Before I could process the sting of rejection or ask if there had been a mistake, a separate direct message from my mother Bernice appeared at the top of the screen. I opened it, my fingers trembling slightly. The message was brutal in its clarity. "Simone, do not ask about the trip in the group chat. We are celebrating with Brad's parents this year, and they are very high society people. We cannot have you showing up in your discount rack clothes and talking about your special needs students. It depresses people and ruins the aesthetic. Just tell everyone you are too busy grading papers. It is for the best." I stared at the glowing screen for a long time. The old Simone would have cried. The old Simone would have begged for a seat at the table, promising to wear something expensive and keep her mouth shut. But the woman I had become simply took a deep breath and set down her wine glass. I did not reply with anger. I did not call her to scream. Instead, I took a clear screenshot of the plane tickets and her cruel message. I opened a hidden encrypted folder on my phone labeled Case File 892 Evidence and saved the image. This was not just a family dispute anymore, it was documentation. Then I went back to the group chat, pressed the 3 dots in the corner, and selected Leave Group. I was done begging for love from people who only valued net worth. If they wanted me to be a stranger, I would be a stranger. But they forgot one thing. Strangers can be dangerous, especially when they secretly hold the keys to your future. 5 years later, my reality looked very different from the luxury my family chased. I worked at Lincoln Elementary in the South Side, a school where the textbooks were taped together and the air conditioning had been broken since the 90s. To my mother, this was failure, but to me it was the front line. I was kneeling on the scuffed linoleum floor, holding the hands of a 7-year-old boy named Marcus, who was nonverbal and in the middle of a sensory overload. His sobbing echoed off the peeling paint of the hallway walls. "Breathe, Marcus," I whispered, keeping my voice steady and low. "Just breathe with me, because you are safe here." Slowly, his grip on my hands loosened, and his breathing matched mine. This was why I did what I did. Not for the accolades, but for the moments when a child realized they were not broken, just different. Just as I settled Marcus back at his desk, my phone buzzed in my pocket. The caller ID did not display a name, just a secure government area code. I stepped into the supply closet for privacy, pressing the phone to my ear. It was the governor's chief of staff. I lowered my voice, adopting a tone that anyone passing by would mistake for a timid teacher pleading with an angry parent. "Please, I understand the situation is difficult," I said softly, my eyes fixed on a stack of construction paper. "But we really cannot compromise on this. If that zoning permit is approved without the environmental impact study, the fallout will be catastrophic." To a listener, I sounded desperate, but in reality, I was issuing a command. The chief of staff on the other end simply replied, "Understood, Ms. Wilson. We will kill the permit immediately." I hung up and slipped the phone back into my pocket just as the school principal walked by. "Tough parent?" she asked sympathetically. I just smiled, a small tired smile, and said, "You have no idea." I barely had time to return to my lesson plan when my phone vibrated again. This time the name on the screen made my blood run cold. It was not a government official. It was a number from the city hospital. I answered, my professional mask slipping for the first time that day. The voice on the other end was clinical and urgent. "Ms. Wilson, we have your father, Lawrence Wilson, here. He has suffered a mild stroke. You are listed as his emergency contact in his old records." I stood frozen in the middle of the classroom. For 5 years I had been a ghost to them. I had built a wall of silence so high I thought nothing could scale it. But hearing that my father, the only man who had ever tried, albeit weakly, to love me, was lying in a hospital bed, the wall crumbled. I grabbed my worn leather satchel, looked at my messy classroom one last time, and ran out the door. I was going back not as the daughter they knew, but as a woman they were about to severely underestimate. The hallway of St. Jude's private wing did not smell like sickness. It smelled of expensive floral arrangements and filtered air, a sharp contrast to the bleach and desperation of the public clinics my students' families usually frequented. I adjusted the strap of my bag, taking a moment to steel myself before turning the corner. There they were, like guardians of the gate, stationed right outside my father's room. My sister Chantel was leaning against the wall, scrolling through her phone while her husband Brad paced back and forth. They looked like a magazine advertisement for shallow success. Chantel looked up, her eyes scanning me from head to toe like a barcode scanner at a high-end boutique. She let out a sharp, derisive laugh that made a passing nurse flinch. "Oh, wow, look who finally decided to show up," she announced, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness that barely masked the venom. "I see the teacher salary is hitting hard this month. Seriously, Simone, I thought public schools had dress codes. Are you actually wearing that rag into a private facility?" She gestured vaguely at my cream-colored blouse with a look of pure disgust. To her untrained eye, obsessed with Gucci logos and Louis Vuitton monograms, my quiet luxury looked plain. She did not recognize that the hand-stitched Italian silk I was wearing cost more than her entire tacky outfit. She did not know that in the circles I now moved in, wealth whispered while poverty screamed. I simply smoothed the fabric and kept my voice even. "Hello, Chantel. It is good to see you too. How is Dad?" Chantel ignored my question, turning to her husband. "Brad, darling, look who is here. The prodigal daughter has returned from the slums." Brad did not even lift his head. He was barking into his latest iPhone, completely absorbed in his own self-importance. He was wearing a suit that was too shiny, and a watch that was too big, a man trying desperately to look like he owned the world. "Yeah, I do not care what the zoning board says, just grease the right palms," he shouted into the phone, oblivious to the fact that he was in a hospital. He walked right past me, his shoulder brushing mine aggressively, treating me with the same regard he would a piece of furniture. When he finally ended the call, he looked at me with glazed, bored eyes. "Oh, hey, Simone. Did not see you there. You blend into the background so well." Chantel giggled, covering her mouth with a manicured hand. "That is her specialty, Brad. Being invisible. Anyway, do not worry about the medical bill. We handled it. We know you are probably counting pennies to buy chalk or whatever it is you do. Just try not to embarrass us while you are here, okay? Brad wants to network with the chief of cardiology later, and we do not need you looking like the help." I felt a flash of heat rise up my neck, but I forced it down. They stood between me and the door, blocking my path, not physically, but with an invisible wall of superiority. They had no idea that the zoning board Brad was screaming about reported directly to my office. They had no idea that I could crush his business with a single email, but not yet. I swallowed my pride and nodded, stepping around them to enter my father's room, leaving their laughter behind me in the hallway. Inside the hospital room, the air was thick with the scent of antiseptic and expensive perfume. My father, Lawrence, looked frail against the stark white sheets, a shadow of the strong man who used to carry me on his shoulders. His eyes watered when he saw me. "Simone, you came," he whispered, his voice raspy and weak. Before I could reach for his hand, my mother Bernice stepped between us like a physical barrier. She did not hug me. She did not even look relieved. She simply adjusted her pearl necklace and gave a tight, disapproval sniff. "Well, at least you are here," she said coldly. "Try not to upset your father with stories about your unpaid bills or your difficult students. We want him to rest, not worry about your poor life choices." I swallowed the lump in my throat and moved to the other side of the bed, taking my father's hand in mine. He squeezed it faintly, and for a second I felt like a daughter again. But the moment was short-lived. Brad, who had followed me into the room, suddenly cleared his throat. He was looking at me differently now. The boredom in his eyes had been replaced by a calculated hunger. I could practically hear the gears turning in his head as he looked from my simple clothes to his wife's designer outfit. He had just gotten off the phone with his public relations team about his city council campaign, and I realized with a jolt that he was not seeing a sister-in-law. He was seeing a marketing opportunity. He needed to soften his image as a ruthless developer, and what better way than to parade a struggling public servant relative around? Simone, Brad said, his voice dropping an octave to sound fake sincere. "I was just thinking, Mom and Dad's 40th anniversary party is coming up next weekend. We are throwing a massive gala at the estate. The mayor might come, plenty of potential investors. You really should be there." Chantel looked at her husband as if he had grown a second head. "Why would we want her there, Brad? She barely owns a decent dress. It is a black tie event." Brad silenced her with a sharp look that said, "Shut up and let me work." "Because it is about family, Chantel," he said smoothly, turning his shark-like smile back to me. "Plus, I am launching the campaign for the Skyline Heights project. It looks good to have a diverse crowd. You know, someone who is on the ground, working class, someone who understands the struggle of the common people." He paused, waiting for me to be grateful for the insult. When I did not speak, he added the cherry on top of his condescending sundae. "I will even send a driver to pick you up, Simone. A private town car. That way you do not have to drag yourself there on the bus, or in that unreliable compact car of yours. It is the least I can do. You can consider it my charity contribution for the month." He wanted a token. He wanted a prop to stand next to him so he could point to me and say, "Look, I care about the poor." He had no idea he was inviting the very person who held the stamp of approval for his precious project. I looked at my father, who was looking at me with pleading eyes, begging me to keep the peace. Then I looked at Brad. "Sure, Brad," I said, keeping my face blank. "I would love to come. I will be the most memorable guest you have ever had." I stepped out of the hospital room and let the heavy door click shut behind me, effectively muting the sound of my family's laughter. The air in the hallway felt thinner, and I took a deep breath, trying to clear the scent of Brad's cologne from my lungs. My instinct was to run. I wanted to get into my car, drive back to my quiet apartment, and forget that the Wilson family existed. I had real work to do. There were policy briefs regarding the new educational funding bill sitting on my desk, waiting for my final approval. I did not have time to play dress-up for a party that was clearly designed to be a campaign rally for my arrogant brother-in-law. I reached into my bag for my phone, intending to text Brad a polite but firm decline. I would tell him I had papers to grade or a parent conference. Any excuse would do. But before I could unlock my screen, the sharp click of high heels echoed against the linoleum floor. I did not have to turn around to know who it was. My mother, Bernice, had followed me. She grabbed my arm, her perfectly manicured nails digging into my skin with surprising strength. "Not so fast, Simone," she hissed, her voice low and dangerous. I turned to face her, expecting to see concern for my father, but her eyes were cold and hard like flint. "Do not even think about not coming," she said, reading my mind with the terrifying accuracy only a mother possesses. "If you do not show up, people will talk. They will say the family is fractured. They will say we cast you out. I need this night to be perfect. I have spent months planning this gala, and I will not let your petty grievances ruin my image." She released my arm and took a step back, looking me up and down with a sneer of distaste. "I know why you are hesitant. You are ashamed. You know you do not fit in with our world anymore. But I have a solution." She reached into her purse and pulled out a sleek black wallet. "I will transfer $500 to your account today. Go to the mall, buy a dress that covers up your lack of style, maybe get your hair done. Just try to look like you belong to us for one night. Come to the party, smile for the cameras, and then keep your mouth shut. That is all I ask." $500. The amount was an insult. It was what she probably spent on a single lunch. She thought she could buy my compliance with pocket change. She thought money was the only language I understood because it was the only language she spoke. I looked at her, at the desperation hiding behind her heavy makeup. She was terrified. She was terrified of the cracks in her perfect facade. She was terrified that without me there to play the role of the black sheep, her own flaws might become visible. A slow, cold realization washed over me. If I stayed away, I was just the bitter daughter. But if I went, I would be a witness. I would be there when Brad's project collapsed. I would be there when the truth came out. I would have a front row seat to their downfall. The anger in my chest cooled into something sharper, something more calculated. I forced the corners of my mouth up into a faint, unreadable smile. "You are right, Mother," I said, my voice steady. "Family is important. I will be there, and I will make sure it is a night none of us will ever forget." Bernice nodded, satisfied that she had bullied me into submission once again. She turned and walked back toward the room, her heels clicking a rhythm of victory. She had no idea that she had just invited the executioner to her own celebration. The Uber driver, a sweet college kid named Leo, looked terrified as he pulled his dented Toyota Camry up to the wrought iron gates of the Skyline estate. We were a smudge of beige paint in a line of gleaming black Bentleys and silver Porsches. I could feel the eyes of the other guests burning into us through their tinted windows. Leo cleared his throat nervously. "Miss, are you sure this is the right place? This looks like a movie set." I smiled tightly, clutching my clutch bag. "It is the right place, Leo. Unfortunately." As we inched forward, a burly security guard with an earpiece and a clipboard stepped directly in front of the car, holding up a massive hand. He did not even look at the license plate. He just took one look at the car and my simple black dress through the window and made a snap judgment. He leaned down, tapping on the glass with a heavy gold ring. "Deliveries and catering staff need to use the service entrance on the north side." He barked, his voice loud enough for the couple in the convertible behind us to hear. "We do not allow civilian vehicles in the main valet circle." I rolled down the window, feeling the heat rise in my cheeks. "I am not catering," I said, my voice calm but firm. "I am Simone Wilson. I am the sister of the hostess, Mrs. Chantel Brooks." The guard squinted at me, looking down at his clipboard, and then back at me with open skepticism. "I do not have a Simone on the VIP list. Look, lady, if you are here to wash dishes, just say so. We are holding up the line." Behind us, someone honked a horn impatiently. Before I could respond, a high-pitched laugh cut through the tense evening air. It was a sound I knew better than my own heartbeat. Chantel appeared at the top of the driveway, holding a crystal champagne flute. She was wearing a shimmering gold gown that clung to her body like liquid money. She descended the stone steps with the grace of a predator spotting wounded prey. "Oh, officer, stop!" she called out, waving her hand dismissively. "Do not arrest her. Let the poor thing in." The guard stepped back, looking confused. "You know this person, Mrs. Brooks?" Chantel walked right up to the window of the Toyota, leaning in, so the smell of her expensive perfume filled the car. She flashed a dazzling fake smile at the guard and then at me. "Oh, it is entirely my fault," she said loudly, ensuring the guests in the next car could hear every word. "I totally forgot to warn security that we have the lower income bracket of the family attending tonight. My sister is a teacher, you see. She is not used to places like this." The guard muttered an apology, but Chantel waved him off, turning her shark-like gaze on me. "You can get out here, Simone. But listen, do me a favor. Do not use the front door. The red carpet is currently occupied by the mayor and some very high-profile investors. We need to keep the aesthetic elevated. Just go around the back through the kitchen entrance. The caterers can show you where to hang your coat." She winked as if sharing a fun secret. "Besides, you will feel more comfortable back there anyway. It is less intimidating for you." I thanked Leo and stepped out of the car onto the gravel. As Chantel sashayed back up the driveway to greet a senator, I stood alone for a moment. To anyone watching, I looked like a humiliated relative being sent to the servants' quarters. But as I began the long walk toward the service entrance, I did not feel small. I felt invisible. And in my line of work, invisibility was a superpower. I would enter through the kitchen, but by the end of the night I would own the house. The kitchen was a chaotic war zone of clattering pans, shouting chefs, and the heavy scent of roasting lamb and truffle oil. It was a stark contrast to the silent, dignified entrance I had just been denied. I had barely stepped through the service door, trying to make myself as small as possible to avoid colliding with a waiter carrying a tower of hors d'oeuvres, when a ball of stiff white fabric came hurtling through the air and hit me squarely in the chest. I caught it by reflex, my fingers curling around the rough cotton. It was a starched apron emblazoned with the logo of the high-end catering company Brad had hired. I looked up to see my mother Bernice storming toward me through the steam rising from a massive stockpot. She looked frantic, her perfect updo slightly askew, a sheen of sweat threatening to ruin her matte foundation. She did not say hello. She did not ask how I was. She did not ask about Dad. She simply pointed a manicured finger at the apron in my hands. "Thank God you are here," she snapped, her voice tight with stress. "Maria called in sick at the last minute and we are down a server. Put that on and tie it tight. The senator has been waiting for a refill on his scotch for 5 minutes, and these incompetent temp workers are too slow." I stared at her, blinking slowly as the absurdity of the situation washed over me. "You want me to work the party?" I asked, my voice calm despite the storm brewing in my gut. "I thought I was invited to celebrate the anniversary." Bernice let out a sharp, derisive laugh, checking her reflection in the back of a silver serving spoon. "Oh, please, Simone, do not give me that look of wounded pride. It is not like you are unaccustomed to cleaning up after people. You spend your entire day wiping noses and changing diapers for those broken children you call students. Serving expensive champagne to civilized adults should be a pleasant promotion for you. Besides, you need the money, don't you? Consider this a chance to earn your keep instead of just being a charity case." The insult landed with the precision of a sniper shot. She did not just look down on me, she fundamentally despised who I was. She saw my students as broken things, and my career as nothing more than glorified babysitting. The old Simone, the one who craved her validation, would have put on the apron. She would have swallowed her dignity just to be useful, just to hear her mother say thank you. But that Simone had died the day they cut me out of the family chat. I looked at the tray of crystal glasses glittering under the fluorescent kitchen lights. Then I looked at my mother. I saw the fear in her eyes. She needed to reduce me to the help, because if I was a server, I was beneath her. If I was a guest, I was an equal, and that was something she could not tolerate. I slowly walked over to the wall where the staff coats were hanging. Bernice watched me, her brow furrowing in confusion. "What are you doing?" she demanded. "The tray is over there. Hurry up." I reached up and hooked the apron onto a metal peg, smoothing it out with deliberate care. Then I turned to face her, brushing an imaginary speck of dust from my black silk dress. "No," I said simply. Bernice's eyes went wide. "Excuse me, I am paying you $500 to be here. Do not be ungrateful." I took a step closer to her, invading her personal space, just enough to make her flinch. "You paid me to attend, Mother. You invited me to be a prop in your family photo, not a servant in your kitchen. I am a guest in this house tonight, and guests do not carry trays." Before she could find the breath to scream, I turned on my heel and pushed open the heavy swinging doors. The industrial noise of the kitchen vanished instantly, replaced by the swelling sound of a string quartet and the murmur of polite society. I stepped onto the marble floor of the ballroom, leaving my mother speechless in the steam, and walked straight toward the bar to order a drink. Someone else could serve it to me. The dining room was a masterpiece of pretension. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling like frozen fireworks, casting a golden glow over tables laden with imported white orchids and silverware that probably cost more than my annual rent. I scanned the room, clutching my glass of white wine like a shield. The main table was a fortress of exclusivity, situated right in the center of the room on a raised platform. My parents were there, beaming like royalty. Chantel was holding court with a senator's wife, and Brad was sitting at the head of the table, looking like a king surveying his kingdom. I walked toward them, expecting to find a place card with my name on it near the end of the table. I circled the long linen-covered surface once, then twice. There was no seat for me. Bernice caught my eye from across a centerpiece of white roses. She did not wave. Instead, she made a subtle flicking motion with her wrist, pointing toward the far corner of the room near the swinging doors I had just come through. I turned and saw it. Tucked away in the shadows right next to the busing station where the waiters scraped half-eaten food into garbage bins was a small wobbly folding table. It was the kind of card table you bring out for unexpected extra guests at a backyard barbecue, not a black tie gala. There was no tablecloth, no crystal. Just a single paper napkin and a plastic cup. Sitting around it were 3 toddlers in high chairs screaming and throwing peas at each other. It was the kids' table, but worse. It was the outcast corner. I felt the heat rise in my cheeks, not from shame, but from the sheer audacity of it. The entire room seemed to quiet down as I walked toward my designated exile. Just as I reached the table, Brad stood up, tapping a spoon against his champagne glass to demand attention. The sharp ting-ting-ting echoed through the silent hall. He flashed a grin that was all teeth and no warmth. "Ladies and gentlemen, if you are wondering about the seating arrangements, we had to make a special accommodation tonight." He gestured toward me with his glass, his movements exaggerated and theatrical. "My sister-in-law, Simone, is used to a more cafeteria-style environment given her line of work. We put you right next to the kitchen service station, Simone." A few guests chuckled nervously, uncertain if this was a joke or just cruelty. Brad continued, emboldened by the reaction. "Honestly, we did it for your benefit. I know how it is for you public school teachers. You are always complaining about being underpaid and hungry. This way, you can grab the leftovers right off the plates before the waiters toss them out. It is practically an all-you-can-eat buffet. Enjoy the scraps, Simone. You look like you need the protein." The room erupted in polite ripple of laughter. Chantel covered her mouth, giggling as if her husband was the funniest man alive. My mother just took a sip of her wine, refusing to make eye contact with me. They expected me to run. They expected me to cry or throw a drink or make a scene that would justify their treatment of me. Instead, I pulled out the metal folding chair. It scraped loudly against the floor, a harsh sound that cut through their laughter. I sat down slowly, crossing my legs and smoothing my dress. I looked straight at Brad, raising my plastic cup in a silent toast. He wanted me to be small. He wanted me to be the hungry, desperate relative. But as I sat there amidst the noise of the kitchen and the screaming toddlers, I realized something. From this angle, I had the perfect view of everything. I could see who was drinking too much. I could see who was whispering to whom. And most importantly, I could see the cracks in their perfect picture that they were too close to notice. The waiters had just cleared the appetizer plates when Brad stood up again. He tapped his fork against his crystal flute, sending a sharp, ringing sound through the ballroom that silenced the conversation instantly. He adjusted his silk tie and puffed out his chest, looking every inch the conquering hero he believed himself to be. He did not just want to host a party, he wanted to hold court. He signaled to the lighting crew, and the chandeliers dimmed, while a spotlight focused entirely on him, leaving the rest of us in the shadows. Friends, family, and distinguished investors, Brad began, his voice booming with practiced charisma. Tonight is not just about celebrating 40 years of marriage for Lawrence and Bernice. It is about the future. It is about legacy. He paused for dramatic effect, letting his gaze sweep across the room before landing briefly and dismissively on my exile table in the corner. For too long, the South District has been a stain on our beautiful city. It is a breeding ground for crime, a wasteland of crumbling brick and broken dreams. We drive past it with our windows rolled up, praying the stoplights do not turn red. A ripple of uncomfortable but agreeing laughter moved through the crowd. I gripped my plastic cup tight. He was talking about my neighborhood. He was talking about the streets where my students walked to school every morning. He continued his pitch, his hands moving animatedly. Well, I am proud to announce that the Brooks Development Group is finally taking out the trash. Next month, we break ground on Skyline Heights. We are bulldozing 6 city blocks of that urban decay to make way for a state-of-the-art luxury residential complex. No more boarded-up windows. No more loiterers. Just glass steel and high-end retail. He projected an image of a gleaming, futuristic tower onto the wall behind him. It was sterile and soulless, completely erasing the history of the community that lived there. That eyesore of a public school on 5th Street, Brad said with a sneer, pointing at the map. Gone. The soup kitchen next to it. Gone. We are cutting out the cancer of the city to make room for progress. We are taking a place that has zero value and turning it into a gold mine. The room erupted in applause. My mother clapped the loudest, beaming at her son-in-law, as if he had just cured a disease rather than announcing the displacement of hundreds of families. I felt a cold fury settling in my stomach. He called my school a cancer. He called the community center where Mr. Henderson taught chess to at-risk youth a waste of space. To Brad, people without money were not citizens, they were obstacles to be removed. He raised his glass high. So here is to Skyline Heights. Here is to a cleaner, richer, and better future for the people who actually matter. As the guests drank to the destruction of my world, I stared at Brad's smiling face. He thought the deal was done. He thought the demolition was inevitable. He did not know that the environmental impact report for those 6 blocks was sitting on my desk waiting for a signature he would never get. He was toasting to a ghost project. The applause died down, leaving a heavy silence in its wake. Brad stood there beaming, clutching his champagne flute like a scepter waiting for more adoration. I felt a cold calm settle over me. This was it. This was the moment they revealed exactly who they were, not just as family members, but as human beings. I pushed back my folding chair and the screech of metal against marble acted like a record scratch. Every head turned toward the exile table in the corner. I did not shout. I did not throw my drink. I simply stood up, smoothing the wrinkles in my dress, and spoke with the clear, authoritative voice I used in boardrooms, not classrooms. Brad, I have a question regarding the zoning proposal. The room went deadly quiet. Brad blinked, clearly annoyed that the help was speaking. I continued staring him dead in the eye. You mentioned clearing out the decay. Does your proposal include a federally mandated relocation plan for the 500 special needs students at Lincoln Elementary or the 300 elderly residents in the assisted living facility next door? Because under current state law, displacing vulnerable populations without a transition strategy is a felony. For a second, Brad looked stunned, not because he was afraid, but because he was confused. He laughed, a short, barking sound that echoed off the high ceilings. Relocation plan. Simone, do not be naive. Those people are the city's problem, not mine. If they cannot afford to live in Skyline Heights, they can move to the next town over. That is how gentrification works. It is survival of the fittest. Before I could respond, Chantel leaned forward, her diamond earrings catching the light. She swirled her wine, looking at me with pity mixed with disdain. "Oh, look, everyone! Saint Simone has entered the chat." She rolled her eyes theatrically, soliciting laughs from the table. "Honestly, Simone, worry about yourself first. If that dump of a school gets bulldozed, you are going to be unemployed. You should be thanking Brad for revitalizing the economy, not grilling him about a bunch of kids who probably do not even know what day of the week it is." My mother Bernice chimed in, nodding in agreement. "Your sister is right, Simone. You are always so dramatic, trying to save the world when you cannot even save your own bank account. Sit down and stop ruining the mood with your depressing questions. Brad is doing a good thing. He is cleaning up the streets." I looked at them, at the smug satisfaction on their faces. They truly believed they were untouchable. They thought my question was a plea for mercy. They did not realize it was an interrogation. By admitting in front of 50 witnesses that he had no relocation plan, Brad had just confessed to violating the very act I had spent the last year writing. He just handed me the weapon I needed to destroy him. I sat back down slowly, picking up my plastic cup. "You are right, Chantel," I said softly. "I should worry about my job, because after tonight, I am going to be very busy." The waiters cleared the dinner plates, and the atmosphere shifted from dining to spectacle. It was time for the presentation of gifts, a ritual my family treated less like a sentimental exchange and more like a competitive sport. Brad made a show of standing up, adjusting his suit jacket, and signaling for the photographer to come closer. He held a square box wrapped in silver paper, holding it aloft, as if it contained the crown jewels. "This is a little something from Chantel and me," he announced, his voice projecting to the back of the room. "Because 40 years of marriage deserves gold standard recognition." My father Lawrence took the box with trembling hands. He unwrapped it slowly, revealing a heavy, solid gold Rolex Submariner. The room gasped in collective appreciation. My mother Bernice let out a squeal of delight, immediately reaching over to touch the cold metal. "Oh, Lawrence, look at that shine," she cooed, her eyes reflecting the diamonds on the bezel. "This is magnificent." "Brad, you should not have." Brad waved a hand dismissively, soaking up the admiration. "Only the best for the patriarch of the family. Put it on, Dad. Let everyone see what success looks like." I stood in the shadows of the corner table, watching my father strap the heavy watch onto his wrist. It looked like a shackle. I knew exactly where the money for that watch had come from. It was purchased with the initial investor capital for the Skyline Heights project, listed in the ledger as a marketing expense. They were wearing their debt like jewelry. When the applause finally died down, I picked up the small rectangular package I had brought. It was wrapped in simple brown paper, tied with a piece of twine. I walked toward the main table, feeling the temperature in the room drop as I approached. "Happy anniversary, Dad," I said softly, placing the package on the tablecloth next to his plate. My mother stopped smiling. She looked at the brown paper as if it were a dead rat. "What is this?" she asked, her nose wrinkling. "It looks like something you found in a dumpster." My father ignored her and carefully peeled back the paper. Inside was a first edition copy of The Fire Next Time by James Baldwin, signed by the author. It was a book my father had quoted to me constantly when I was a child, before the money and the greed took over. For a split second, I saw a spark of the old Lawrence in his eyes. He ran his hand over the worn cover, his mouth opening to say thank you. But Bernice was faster. She reached out and shoved the book aside, sending it sliding across the tablecloth until it hit a gravy boat. "A book," she scoffed, her voice loud and cutting. "Seriously, Simone, that is your contribution. Your sister gives gold, and you give dust." I looked at her, fighting the urge to explain that the book was worth more at auction than her dress. "It is a rare edition, Mom," I said calmly. "Dad loves this author." Bernice laughed a harsh, ugly sound. Old paper does not pay the bills, Simone. You want your father to read himself to starvation. We are trying to elevate this family, not drag it back to the library. Take this trash back to your apartment. It does not belong on a table with diamonds. My father lowered his head, the spark in his eyes extinguished, and went back to admiring the stolen watch. I picked up the book, dusting off the cover, and realized that was the last time I would ever try to reach him. They had chosen their gold. Now they would have to live with the weight of it. As the dinner service wound down and the waiters began pouring the third round of wine, the atmosphere in the ballroom shifted from formal to predatory. The serious investors were loosening their ties, and the volume of laughter at the main table grew louder and coarser. I remained at my exile table near the kitchen doors, watching the room through the rim of my plastic cup. I was just calculating how soon I could politely leave when a shadow fell over me. I looked up to find a man standing there. He was older, perhaps in his late 50s, with a face flushed from too much bourbon and a suit that cost more than my car. I recognized him immediately as Mr. Sterling, one of the city's most notorious real estate sharks, and a key financier for Brad's project. He leaned against my wobbly table, causing the plastic cutlery to rattle. "You look entirely too lovely to be sitting back here with the dirty dishes," he slurred slightly, his eyes dragging over me in a way that made my skin crawl. "Brad tells me you are a schoolteacher. That is charming, really. But a woman with your assets should not be wasting her time in a classroom. You should be somewhere you can be properly appreciated." He reached out and brushed a lock of hair from my shoulder. I stiffened, pulling back instinctively, but before I could tell him to back off, Brad appeared at his elbow. I expected my brother-in-law to step in. I expected him to have a shred of protective instinct, or at least a basic sense of decency toward his wife's sister. I expected him to tell Sterling to leave me alone. But once again I had overestimated him. Brad wrapped an arm around Sterling's shoulders, grinning like a co-conspirator. "I see you have found the family charity case, Sterling. Careful, she bites. But honestly, you are right. She is wasted on those kids." Brad looked at me, his eyes cold and calculating, devoid of any familial warmth. "Simone here is single. Painfully single, actually. And given her salary at that public school, she is definitely in need of some financial assistance." He turned back to Sterling and winked, a gesture so vile it made my stomach turn. "Why do you not make her an offer, Sterling? She is hardworking, obedient, and desperate. You are looking for a new private secretary, aren't you? Or maybe a personal assistant for your late-night meetings. Just name your price. I am sure she would agree to anything to get out of debt." The two men laughed, a wet, guttural sound that seemed to suck the air out of the room. They discussed me as if I were a piece of property, a used car on a lot that they could haggle over. Brad was not just insulting me, he was selling me out to curry favor with a donor. He was willing to trade my dignity for a signature on a check. I felt a cold, absolute clarity wash over me. This was not just a dysfunctional family. These were bad people. I stood up slowly, the metal legs of my chair scraping against the floor. I did not look at Sterling. I looked straight at Brad. "I am not for sale, Brad," I said, my voice low and steady, cutting through their laughter. "And I am not desperate. I suggest you focus on your own finances, because from where I am standing, your future looks incredibly expensive." I picked up my purse and walked away, leaving them confused, but still laughing, convinced I was just a bitter woman storming off. They did not know I was walking away to sign their death warrant. The laughter from Brad and Mr. Sterling hung in the air like a toxic cloud, suffocating and thick. My hands were trembling not from fear, but from a desperate final hope that was rapidly dying in my chest. I did not look at the two men who had just insulted me. I turned my gaze to the head of the table, to the man who had raised me, to the man who used to read me bedtime stories and tell me that I was a princess who deserved the world. I looked at my father, Lawrence. "Dad?" I said, my voice cutting through the noise, loud enough for him to hear, but soft enough that it sounded like a plea. Did you hear what they just said? The room went quiet again. This was the moment. This was the script flip. In every movie, in every story of redemption, this is where the father stands up. This is where he slams his fist on the table, throws the expensive watch back in his son-in-law's face, and defends his daughter's honor. I waited for that moment. I waited for him to be the hero I had invented in my head to survive my childhood. Lawrence looked up. His eyes met mine, and for a split second, I saw the conflict raging behind them. I saw the shame. But then his eyes darted to the left. He looked at Bernice, who was glaring at him with a warning sharpness that could cut glass. Then he looked at Brad, the man who paid the mortgage, the man who covered the medical bills, the man who had just gifted him the golden shackle currently weighing down his left wrist. The calculation happened in real time. I watched my father weigh his love for me against his love for comfort, and I watched him choose. He did not stand up. He did not speak. He slowly lowered his gaze to his porcelain plate, picked up his silver fork, and stabbed a potato. He took a bite, chewing slowly, staring resolutely at the tablecloth as if I did not exist. The silence from his end of the table was deafening. It was a physical blow, harder and more brutal than any slap across the face. That silence broke me. It shattered the last fragile illusion I had been clinging to for years. I had always told myself that Dad was a victim too, that he was just weak, just beaten down by Mom's tyranny. But I realize now, that was a lie. He was not a victim. He was an accomplice. He had sold his spine for a Rolex and a seat at the VIP table. By saying nothing, he had signed off on my humiliation. He had agreed that I was nothing more than a bargaining chip for Brad's business deals. The pain that washed over me was blinding, but it was followed instantly by a cold, numbing anesthesia. The little girl inside me who wanted her daddy's approval died in that chair. And in her place, the woman who would destroy this family's false empire was fully born. I looked at the top of his balding head, watching him chew his food like a coward. I felt a tear slide down my cheek, but I wiped it away before anyone could see. I was done being the daughter. I was done being the victim. "Enjoy your dinner, Dad," I whispered, though I knew he wouldn't look up. "I hope it's worth it." I turned my back on the table, on the glimmering candlelight, and on the people who shared my DNA but not my heart. I walked toward the exit with my head held high, the sound of my heels striking the marble floor, sounding like the ticking of a clock counting down to their destruction. The walk across the ballroom floor felt like a funeral march for my past self, but a coronation for the woman I was becoming. With every click of my heels against the marble, I was severing another tie, another memory, and another hope. The room was still buzzing with the energy of their mockery. They were so drunk on their own arrogance that they did not notice the shift in the atmosphere. They did not notice that the temperature in the room seemed to drop as I passed. I reached the massive oak doors and paused. My hand rested on the cold brass handle. Behind me, I heard Brad call out one last time, his voice slurring slightly with champagne and malice. "Hey, Simone, do not forget to take a doggy bag on your way out. We know how much you love handouts." The guests roared with laughter. It was an ugly sound, a sound of exclusion and privilege that had haunted me for my entire life. I turned slowly. I did not scream. I did not cry. I did not throw a glass. I simply stood tall, my spine made of steel. I looked at them one last time, committing the scene to memory, like a photograph I would later use as evidence. I looked at my mother, who was busy refilling her wine glass, refusing to meet my eyes. I looked at my father, who was staring at his new gold watch, as if it could tell him the time of his own demise. I looked at Chantel and Brad, who were high-fiving like teenagers, celebrating a touchdown. "Happy anniversary," I said, my voice carrying clearly across the room, cutting through the noise like a razor blade. "I hope you enjoy every second of tonight. Take plenty of pictures. And remember every single word you said to me today. Keep them close, because memories are all you are going to have left." The laughter faltered slightly. A few guests looked uncomfortable sensing the ominous weight of my words, but Brad just waved his hand dismissively. Go home, Simone. You are ruining the vibe. I pushed the doors open and stepped out into the night. As the heavy wood slammed shut behind me, cutting off the sound of their laughter, I felt a physical weight lift off my shoulders. I stood alone on the gravel driveway, taking the deepest breath of my life. The air was crisp and clean, free of the scent of expensive perfume and rot. I pulled my phone from my clutch. The screen glowed in the darkness, illuminating my face, which was no longer the face of a victim. I opened my rideshare app, but before I confirmed the pickup, I opened my notes app. I typed 3 words. Section 12B. It was the clause in the new education bill that allowed for the immediate suspension of any commercial project deemed a hazard to student welfare. I stared at the mansion one last time, watching the shadows of the people dancing inside. They were dancing on a grave and they did not even know it was their own. I got into the waiting car and watched the Skyline estate disappear in the rearview mirror. I did not look back. The next time they saw me, I would not be the sister they mocked. I would be the storm they never saw coming. 3 days after the anniversary party, the hangover from the champagne had faded, but the headache for the Brooks Development Group was just beginning. Brad sat in his corner office overlooking the city, his feet propped up on the mahogany desk, feeling like the king of the world. He was on the phone with his demolition contractor, laughing loudly. Just tear it all down, Mike. I do not care about the noise complaints. We start digging on Monday. Across the room, Chantel lounged on a leather sofa, flipping through a catalog of Italian marble for the penthouse lobby. It was a scene of perfect arrogance. The intercom buzzed, cutting through their celebration. It was not the polite chirp of a scheduled meeting, but the frantic, repeated buzzing of a crisis. Mr. Brooks, the receptionist's voice trembled. There are federal marshals here. They say they have a court order. Before Brad could swing his feet off the desk, the heavy oak doors swung open. 2 men in dark suits walked in, their expressions stony and unamused. They did not wait for an invitation. One of them stepped forward and dropped a thick manila envelope onto Brad's desk. It landed with a heavy thud that rattled the expensive Newton's cradle. Bradley Brooks, you have been served, the marshal said, his voice flat. This is an immediate injunction against the Skyline Heights development. All construction activity must cease effective immediately pending a federal review. Brad laughed, a nervous sound bubbling up in his chest. Is this a joke? Did Sterling put you up to this? He reached for the envelope, tearing it open with shaking hands. He pulled out the document, and the first thing he saw was the bold red stamp across the top, cease and desist. He scanned the legal jargon, his eyes widening with every line. Violation of state zoning code, failure to comply with environmental standards, and then in the center of the page, the death sentence. Violation of the Public Education Protection Act, also known as PEPA. Brad looked up, his face draining of color. PEPA? What the hell is PEPA? I have never even heard of this law. Chantel stood up, dropping her marble samples. Brad, what is going on? What does it mean? Brad slammed his fist down on the desk, making her jump. It means they shut us down, Chantel. It means we cannot break ground. He grabbed his phone, dialing his lawyer with frantic, clumsy fingers. Pick up, you overpaid idiot. When the lawyer finally answered, Brad screamed into the receiver. Why am I looking at a court order stopping my project? What is this PEPA thing? The lawyer's voice on the other end was tinny and terrified. Mr. Brooks, I am looking at it now. It is a brand new legislation passed last month. It creates a protective buffer zone around at-risk educational facilities. Apparently, your construction site is within 500 feet of Lincoln Elementary. Brad froze. The name of the school hit him like a physical blow. Lincoln Elementary, Simone's school, the school he had mocked, the school he had called a cancer. He remembered Simone's calm question at the dinner. Do you have a relocation plan? He hadn't answered her then. Now the state was answering for him. We are losing $50,000 a day if we do not build. Brad hissed into the phone, sweat beading on his forehead. Fix this. I do not care who you have to bribe. Fix it. But as he stared at the court order, seeing the official seal of the governor's office, he felt a creeping dread. This was not a clerical error. This was a targeted strike. And for the first time, Brad realized that the cancer he wanted to remove was fighting back. The silence from the construction site below was deafening. Just 24 hours ago, the air had been filled with the roar of bulldozers and the sound of jackhammers tearing up the pavement. Now the heavy machinery sat silent and abandoned in the mud like the skeletons of prehistoric beasts. Inside the penthouse office, the atmosphere was anything but quiet. It smelled of fear and stale coffee. Brad was burning through his contact list like a man on a sinking ship burning furniture for warmth. He dialed the mayor's private line for the third time. Straight to voicemail. He dialed the chief of police. Busy signal. He even tried his golf buddy on the city council who usually approved permits in exchange for a bottle of scotch. The call failed instantly. They were ghosting him. Brad slammed the receiver down so hard the plastic cracked. They know, he whispered, his face pale. Everyone knows. They are treating me like I have the plague. Chantel was pacing the length of the Persian rug, chewing on a fingernail she had paid $100 to have manicured. Her perfect facade was cracking. Well, do something, Brad, she shrieked. If we lose this project, the bank takes the house. They take the cars. I am not going back to renting. I will not be poor Brad. Fix this. Brad wiped sweat from his upper lip and dialed one last number. It was Marcus, a heavy-hitter lobbyist who claimed he could fix a murder charge for the right price. Marcus answered on the first ring, but his voice was low and hurried. Do not call me Brad. I cannot be seen talking to you right now. Marcus, wait. Brad pleaded, gripping the desk. I will double your fee. Just tell me who I need to talk to. Who signed this order? I need a name. There was a pause on the line, heavy and pregnant with bad news. It came from the top, Brad. Marcus hissed. The order came directly from the governor's special advisor on education. We do not know her real name, but around the capital they call her the Iron Lady. She does not take bribes, she takes heads. She flagged your project personally. If the Iron Lady wants you dead, you are dead. Do not call me again. The line went dead. Brad stared at the phone, his hand shaking. The Iron Lady. He snatched the cease and desist order off the desk, scanning it frantically for a clue, anything he could use. His eyes landed on the signature at the bottom of the last page. It was a sharp, authoritative scrawl. Approved by S. Wilson, Senior Advisor. Brad let out a harsh, relieved laugh. Wilson, he muttered, a grin spreading across his face. Of course. It is not an Iron Lady. It is a mistake. S. Wilson. That has to be Samuel Wilson. Chantel stopped pacing. Who is Samuel Wilson? He is that ancient senator from the North District. Brad said, his confidence rushing back like a drug. He is 80 years old and senile. He probably signed this without even reading it. He is a man, Chantel, and men like Samuel Wilson understand business. Brad slammed the paper down, looking at the signature with newfound contempt. He saw the name Wilson and thought of a powerful white man. It never even crossed his mind that S. Wilson could stand for Simone. It never occurred to him that the Iron Lady Marcus warned him about was the same woman he had sent to the kids' table 3 days ago. We just need to find someone who can get us a meeting with the senator, Brad said, buttoning his jacket. We need leverage, and I think I know exactly who to use. The expensive leather chair in the lawyer's office creaked as Mr. Cohen leaned forward, steepling his fingers. He looked at Brad with the weary expression of a man who was used to cleaning up expensive messes. Listen to me carefully, Mr. Brooks, Cohen said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. The cease and desist order from S. Wilson is airtight based on the environmental data. We cannot fight them on the science. If we go to court on the merits of the law, we lose, and we lose big. Brad slammed his hand on the mahogany desk. Then what am I paying you for, Cohen? I am bleeding cash. Every hour those machines sit idle costs me a fortune. Find me a loophole. Cohen nodded slowly. There is one. It is called the Community Benefit Exemption. It is a clause in the very law that is blocking you. If we can prove that the local community, specifically the educational staff at the affected school, actually wants this project to proceed, we can file for an emergency override. We need a petition. But not just any petition. We need a signature from a faculty member at Lincoln Elementary. Someone who can go on record stating that the current school is a hazard and that your development will bring much-needed resources to the children. We need a teacher to sell out their own union. Brad slumped back in his chair, rubbing his temples. That is impossible. The teachers' union hates me. They have been picketing my office for weeks. No self-respecting teacher at Lincoln is going to sign a document supporting the demolition of their own neighborhood. Chantel, who had been listening from the window seat, suddenly stood up. The sunlight caught the diamond bracelet on her wrist as she turned, a slow, wicked smile spreading across her face. Not every teacher hates us, Brad. And not every teacher has integrity. Some of them are just pathetic broke and desperate for approval. Brad looked at his wife, confusion clouding his eyes for a moment, before the realization hit him like a lightning bolt. Simone. Chantel nodded, walking over to the desk. Exactly. My sister works at Lincoln. She has been complaining about that crumbling building for years. She is the perfect Trojan horse. She is a legitimate faculty member, but she is also weak. She let us humiliate her at the party, and she walked away without making a scene. She is soft, Brad. Brad let out a low whistle, the color returning to his cheeks. Simone. Of course. She is so desperate for money, she is practically begging for scraps. If we wave a check in front of her face, she will sign anything. She probably does not even understand what she is signing. We can tell her it is a petition for better school lunches or a new playground. Cohen looked skeptical. Are you sure you can control her? If she reads the fine print. Brad laughed, interrupting him. Control her, Cohen. This is a girl who wore a dress from a discount rack to a black tie gala because my mother told her to. She is a doormat. We do not even need to be clever. We just need to apply a little family pressure. We will make her think she is saving the family from ruin. We will guilt-trip her. And if that does not work, we will buy her. He turned to Chantel, his eyes gleaming with renewed arrogance. Call your mother. Tell Bernice to put on her best crying act. We are going to pay a little visit to my favorite sister-in-law. We are going to get that signature, and then we are going to bury S. Wilson under a mountain of paperwork signed by his own protected class. They thought they had the high ground. They forgot we have a hostage on the inside. The buzzer to my apartment rang at 8 in the evening, shattering the quiet peace I had carefully cultivated. I frowned, setting down my red grading pen. I was not expecting visitors, and certainly not in this neighborhood. When I checked the peephole, I nearly stumbled back in shock. Standing in the dimly lit hallway, clutching a plastic Tupperware container against her Chanel coat, was my mother, Bernice. In the 5 years since I had moved out, she had never once visited me. She had called my address a rat hole and refused to put it in her GPS. Yet here she was, looking around at the peeling paint of the corridor with a mixture of fear and determination. I opened the door, and before I could even say hello, she swept inside, bringing a gust of expensive perfume that clashed violently with the smell of my scented candle. Simone, baby, she cried, her voice wobbling with a theatrical tremor. Look at you, living all alone in this cozy little box. She placed the container on my coffee table, as if it were a holy offering. I brought you chicken soup, homemade, just the way you like it. I stared at the soup. My mother had not cooked a meal since the 90s. That soup was either from a gourmet deli or made by her housekeeper. Mom, what are you doing here? I asked, crossing my arms. I did not offer her a seat. Bernice collapsed onto my sofa anyway, burying her face in her hands. The performance began instantly. Shoulders shaking, loud sobbing, the works. It is a disaster, Simone. A complete disaster. We are going to lose everything. She looked up, her mascara perfectly intact despite the wailing. Brad is in trouble. The city shut down his project. Some bureaucratic nightmare. If he does not get those machines running by next week, he goes bankrupt. She stood up and grabbed my hands, her grip surprisingly strong. And if Brad goes down, we all go down. He mortgaged the big house to fund this deal. If the bank takes it, where will your father and I go? We will be on the street, Simone, homeless at our age. She paused for effect, her eyes searching mine for a reaction. And you know your father is weak. The doctor said stress is a silent killer. If he finds out we are destitute, it will finish him. He will have another stroke, and this time he won't wake up. Do you want that on your conscience? Do you want to be the reason your father dies? I watched her with a detached fascination. It was a masterclass in manipulation. She was weaponizing my father's health, holding his life hostage to get what she wanted. She did not care about the law or the safety of the children at my school. She only cared about her mansion and her status. I knew exactly where this was going. She was not here to feed me soup. She was here to feed me a lie. I slowly pulled my hands away from hers. I am listening, Mom. I said, my voice neutral. What exactly do you expect me to do about Brad's bad business decisions? Bernice wiped a dry tear from her cheek and reached into her purse, pulling out a crisp folded document. I let the silence stretch out between us, heavy and uncomfortable. My mother was still dabbing at her dry eyes, waiting for me to crumble, waiting for me to rush to her side and promise to fix everything. But I remained seated on the armchair, my posture rigid. I was not the same daughter who used to be desperate for a crumb of affection. I was a woman who knew exactly how the game was played. Stop it, Mother, I said, my voice cutting through her theatrical sniffing like a knife. You can save the tears for the bank loan officer. We both know Dad is fine. If he was really dying, you would be at the hospital securing the power of attorney, not here in my living room. So tell me what you actually want. The transformation was instant. Bernice lowered her hands, revealing eyes that were clear and calculating. She smoothed her skirt, and the grieving wife persona vanished, replaced by the cold negotiator I knew so well. You always were too sharp for your own good, Simone, she said, her voice hardening. Fine, you want the truth. Here it is. She reached for the document on the table and slid it across the surface toward me. It looked innocent enough, but I knew better. Brad needs a little help with the zoning board. She explained, her tone breezy, as if asking for a cup of sugar. It seems there is some ridiculous red tape regarding your school. We just need a faculty member to sign this waiver. It simply states that the teachers at Lincoln Elementary support the development. It says you believe the new mall will bring jobs and safety to the area. It is a formality, really. Just a piece of paper to get the bureaucrats off our backs so Brad can save the family fortune. I looked down at the document without touching it. Even from here, I could see the dense legal text. It was not a waiver. It was a declaration that the school was defunct and unnecessary, a lie that would legally justify its demolition. It was a death warrant for my community wrapped in fancy font. And then came the sweetener. Bernice leaned forward, her eyes glinting with a predatory light. I know you are struggling, baby, she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. I see how you live in this place. It smells like despair. Sign the paper. Simone and Brad will cut you a check for $10,000. Tonight. Cash. Think about it. You could move out of this dump. You could buy a decent car. You could finally have a life. You could stop pretending that you enjoy being poor. $10,000. That was the price they put on my soul. That was what they thought my students were worth. To them, I was so pathetic, so broken by poverty, that I would sell out my entire career for the price of a used Honda. I looked at her expecting to feel anger, but all I felt was a cold, dark amusement. They thought they were bribing a desperate teacher. They did not realize they were handing a confession to the prosecutor. I looked up at her, and for the first time in years, I smiled a genuine, dangerous smile. "Show me where to sign," I said. I picked up the heavy ballpoint pen that Bernice had placed on the table next to the document. The metal felt cold against my skin, much like the atmosphere in the room. I took a moment to read the text properly, letting the silence stretch until my mother began tapping her foot impatiently. The document was titled Community Consensus Waiver, but the content was a masterpiece of fiction. It claimed that the undersigned faculty member of Lincoln Elementary certified that the school building was hazardous obsolete and that the student body would be better served by the proposed commercial redevelopment. It was a lie. It was a complete fabrication designed to bulldoze a sanctuary for special needs children so Brad could build a high-rise. Bernice leaned forward, her eyes fixated on the pen. "Just sign it, Simone," she urged, her voice tight with greed. "It is just a piece of paper. Nobody actually reads these things. The zoning board just looks for a signature and a stamp. Do it, and the 10,000 is yours. You can finally move out of this neighborhood. You can finally stop embarrassing us." I looked at the envelope of cash sitting on the coffee table. It was thick, likely filled with $100 bills peeled from Brad's frantic withdrawal earlier that day. They thought this money was my salvation. In reality, it was evidence of their corruption. I uncapped the pen. The sound was sharp in the quiet room. I lowered the tip to the signature line. I signed my name clearly. Simone Wilson. But I did not stop there. With a steady hand, I moved the pen slightly to the right to the box marked Official Notes. In small, precise print, I wrote a string of characters that looked like a standard filing code to the untrained eye. Ref Section 12B. Reject. To my mother, it looked like bureaucratic gibberish. To the zoning board, and specifically to my staff at the governor's office, it was a nuclear code. Section 12B of the Public Education Protection Act was the clause for immediate rejection due to coercion or fraud. By adding that code next to my signature, I wasn't supporting the project. I was flagging it for criminal investigation. I capped the pen and slid the document back across the table. Bernice snatched it up faster than a starving animal. She did not even glance at the annotation. She only saw my name. She saw the signature that she believed would unlock the frozen bank accounts and save her lifestyle. A look of pure, unadulterated triumph washed over her face. She let out a breath she had been holding for 20 minutes. "See," she said, tucking the paper into her designer bag, as if it were a winning lottery ticket. "Was that so hard? You finally did something useful for this family." She stood up, brushing imaginary lint from her coat. "The money is yours. Buy yourself some decent clothes. We will see you at the governor's gala. Try not to look like a beggar this time." She walked out the door without looking back, the clicking of her heels echoing down the hallway. I waited until I heard the elevator ding and the doors slide shut. Only then did I look at the envelope of cash. I didn't touch it. I wouldn't touch it. That money would stay exactly where it was until the authorities arrived to collect it as evidence of bribery. My mother thought she had just bought a solution. She had no idea she had just hand-delivered a signed confession directly to the judge. The next morning, Brad walked into the city zoning office wearing a new Italian suit and a smile that could cut glass. He did not wait in line with the other contractors holding rolled-up blueprints and permits. He marched straight to the front desk where a weary clerk named Ms. Higgins was sorting mail. He slapped the document Bernice had retrieved from Simone onto the counter with a heavy, authoritative thud. "There it is," he announced, loud enough for the entire room to hear. "The Community Consensus Waiver. Signed, sealed, and delivered." Ms. Higgins adjusted her glasses and picked up the paper. She scanned it slowly, her eyes lingering on the signature line. Brad drummed his fingers on the countertop, impatient and brimming with adrenaline. He had spent the morning popping champagne with Chantel, convinced that their financial nightmare was over. In his mind, this piece of paper was not just a permit. It was a vindication. It was proof that money could solve any problem, and that everyone, including his stubborn sister-in-law, had a price. "Is there a problem?" Brad asked sharply when Ms. Higgins paused. "It is a standard waiver." The faculty supports the project. The community wants the jobs. Stamp it so I can get my crew back to work. I am losing money every second you stare at that thing." Ms. Higgins looked at him, then back at the paper. She did not mention the small annotation next to the signature. She simply nodded, a strange, unreadable expression on her face. "I will file this immediately, Mr. Brooks. The review board will see it this afternoon." Brad snatched his receipt and walked out of City Hall feeling invincible. He pulled out his phone and dialed Chantel. "It is done, baby," he crowed as he stepped out into the bright sunlight. The clerk took it without blinking. "We are back in business. Tell the foreman to prep the bulldozers for Monday morning. We are going to tear that school apart, brick by brick." But Brad was not satisfied with just reopening the project. He wanted to gloat. He wanted to look the person who had tried to stop him in the eye and show them that he was untouchable. He remembered the name on the cease and desist order. S. Wilson, the mysterious advisor. He was still convinced it was Samuel Wilson, the elderly senator. He wanted to shake the old man's hand, and maybe even mock him a little for trying to stand in the way of progress. He walked past a billboard advertising the annual Governor's Education Gala happening that Saturday night. It was the most exclusive event of the season, a black tie fundraiser attended by the city's power players. And right there on the poster, it listed the keynote speakers, including the Governor's Special Advisory Board. Brad stopped. He grinned. He called his assistant. "Get me 3 tickets to the Governor's Gala. VIP tables only. I do not care what it costs, put it on the company card." The assistant hesitated. "Sir, those tickets are $5,000 each, and the company card is nearly maxed out." Brad laughed, a harsh, reckless sound. "Just buy them. By Monday we will be swimming in investors again. I need to be in that room. I need to introduce myself to Mr. S. Wilson and thank him for the challenge." He hung up, oblivious to the fact that he had just spent the last of his credit to buy a front-row seat to his own execution. He thought he was walking into a victory lap. He had no idea he was walking into a trap set by the very woman he had called a loser. The Saturday of the gala arrived with a sky the color of bruised iron, perfectly matching the tension that had settled over the city. I was in my apartment sipping herbal tea and reviewing the final draft of my speech when my phone buzzed. It was Brad. He did not say hello. He did not ask if I was free. He simply barked a time and an order into the receiver. "Be ready at 6 o'clock sharp, Simone. The limo is picking you up, and for the love of God, do not wear anything that smells like a classroom." I set my tea down slowly. "Excuse me, Brad?" I asked, playing the role of the confused subordinate. "I thought the gala was for VIPs. Why would you want me there?" Brad let out a sigh of exaggerated patience, the kind one uses with a slow child or a disobedient pet. "I am not bringing you for your company, Simone," he snapped. "I bought you a ticket because I need an insurance policy. Those tickets cost $5,000 apiece, so you better appreciate the investment I am making in you. I need you there to back up that waiver you signed. If this S. Wilson character or anyone from the zoning board asks about the school, I need a living, breathing teacher to stand there and tell them that the building is a death trap. I need you to smile, nod, and confirm that the community is begging for my mall. You are my prop. Do you understand?" "I understand," I said, my voice steady. "You want me to lie for you in person." "It is not lying, it is marketing," Brad corrected, his voice dripping with arrogance. "And listen to me closely. This is a black tie event. That means no polyester, no scuffed shoes, and no looking like a charity case. Mom said she gave you money. Use it. Buy something that makes you look like you belong to a successful family for once. If you embarrass me in front of the governor or the investors, I will make sure you never work in this city again." He hung up before I could respond, leaving the threat hanging in the silent air of my living room. I looked at the phone and felt a cold thrill of anticipation. Brad was bringing me along as a shield, thinking I would protect his lies. He wanted me to confirm the validity of the signature. He had no idea that by bringing me, he was actually bringing the prosecutor to the crime scene. He wanted me to dress the part of a successful woman. For the first time in our relationship, I was going to give him exactly what he asked for. I walked into my bedroom and bypassed the small rack of modest work clothes that my family associated with my identity. I reached to the back of the closet where I kept the garment bag that contained my true self. I unzipped it, revealing a floor-length midnight blue silk gown that I had purchased in Paris during a diplomatic summit the previous year. It was elegant, powerful, and commanded attention. It was the kind of dress worn by women who signed laws, not petitions. I ran my hand over the cool fabric. Brad wanted me to look like I belonged to his world. Tonight I would show him that I did not just belong to his world, I was the one who controlled it. I would go to his party. I would stand by his side. And when the time came, I would answer every question about that signature with a truth that would shatter his glass house into a million pieces. I started to get ready, applying my makeup with the precision of a warrior painting on war paint. The lowly teacher was staying home tonight. The Iron Lady was going out. The stretch limousine glided to a halt in front of the Grand Hotel, the tires crunching softly against the pristine pavement. Outside the tinted windows, the world was a blur of flashing camera bulbs and velvet ropes. It was the governor's education gala, the most coveted invitation in the city, and the air crackled with the electricity of power and money. Inside the car, the atmosphere was suffocating. Brad was checking his teeth in the rearview mirror, wiping a smudge of lipstick from his cheek. Bernice was frantically adjusting her diamond necklace, muttering about making a good impression. And then there was Chantel. My sister looked like a disco ball that had exploded. She was wearing a gold sequined gown with a train so long it required its own zip code and enough feathers to stuff a mattress. She believed she looked like royalty. To me, she looked like desperation wrapped in polyester. I, on the other hand, sat in the corner of the leather seat, invisible in the shadows. I was wearing a floor-length black dress. To my family, it looked plain, bordering on boring. It had no sequins, no cleavage, and no loud patterns. They did not recognize the cut of a bespoke garment or the subtle sheen of high-grade silk. I slid a pair of dark, oversized sunglasses onto my face, shielding my eyes from the glare of the paparazzi awaiting us. Brad kicked the door open and stepped out, waving at photographers who had no idea who he was. Chantel followed, dragging her train behind her, soaking up the attention like a lizard in the sun. I stepped out last. The cool evening air hit my face, and I adjusted my glasses. I moved to stand beside my sister, instinctively falling into the family formation, but Chantel stopped dead in her tracks. She turned to me, her face contorted in a mask of horror. "What do you think you are doing?" she hissed, her voice low so the cameras wouldn't catch the venom. "Do not stand next to me. Look at you. You look like a funeral director. You are ruining my aesthetic." She looked around frantically, then shoved her heavy crystal-encrusted clutch bag into my chest. I caught it by reflex. "Here," she commanded, pointing a manicured finger at me. "Make yourself useful. Hold this. You look like my assistant anyway, so you might as well act the part. And for God's sake, walk 3 steps behind us. Do not walk parallel to me. I do not want anyone confusing us. I want people to know who the star is and who the help is." Brad laughed, buttoning his jacket. "She is right, Simone. Know your place. Just trail behind and look invisible. If anyone asks, you are handling Chantel's scheduling." I looked down at the tacky bag in my hands, then up at my sister and brother-in-law. They were preening for the cameras, convinced they were the kings of the jungle. They had no idea that the assistant standing behind them was the one who had approved the guest list. I tightened my grip on the bag, not in anger, but in anticipation. I adjusted my sunglasses, hiding the amusement in my eyes. I would play the assistant. I would walk behind them. Because the view from the back was the best place to watch them fall. I nodded silently and took my position 3 paces back, watching as they strutted onto the red carpet, marching confidently toward their own destruction. The interior of the grand ballroom was blindingly opulent, with crystal chandeliers the size of small cars and a guest list that represented the combined GDP of a small country. Brad strutted onto the parquet floor with Chantel on his arm, looking like a man ready to collect a prize. I walked 3 paces behind them, clutching the ugly sequined bag and keeping my head down. From my vantage point, I could see what Brad refused to acknowledge. He was radioactive. As he moved through the crowd, people did not part for him out of respect. They moved away from him to avoid contamination. Brad spotted Councilman Vance, a man he had played golf with just 2 weeks ago, standing near the ice sculpture. Brad's face lit up. "Robert," he called out, booming his voice across the respectful murmur of the crowd. "Good to see you. I have some great news about the Skyline project." He extended his hand for a handshake. Councilman Vance looked at Brad, then looked at the extended hand, and then deliberately turned his back to start an intense conversation with a waiter about the crab cakes. Brad was left standing there, his hand hanging in empty air. His smile faltered for a fraction of a second before hardening into a rictus of anger. "Did you see that?" Brad hissed to Chantel, pulling her closer. "The disrespect. He is just scared because of the injunction. Watch how fast he comes crawling back once I get the green light tonight." He scanned the room, his eyes darting around, desperately searching for someone, anyone who would validate his existence. But the result was the same everywhere. A banker suddenly found his drink fascinating. A developer he knew checked his watch and walked away. The elite of the city were freezing him out, and the temperature around us was dropping rapidly. But beneath the music and the clinking of glasses, there was a different kind of energy. A murmur was rippling through the room, a whisper that grew louder as the lights began to dim. I could hear snippets of conversation from the people standing near us. "Is she here yet? I heard the governor is introducing her personally. They say she is the one who wrote the new education mandate. The Iron Lady, the architect." Brad heard it too. He leaned in toward Chantel, his expression smug and knowing. "You hear that, babe? They are talking about S. Wilson, the mystery advisor." He chuckled, shaking his head. "I bet she is some dried-up old bureaucrat with a bun and orthopedic shoes. Probably a retired librarian who hates progress. That is why she blocked my project. She is bitter. But do not worry. I know how to handle old biddies. I will charm her. I will compliment her vintage shawl, and she will sign that release form before dessert is served. Old ladies love me." I bit the inside of my cheek to keep from laughing out loud. Brad was so blinded by his own prejudice that he had concocted an entire imaginary persona for his adversary. He was expecting a fragile, elderly white woman he could manipulate with a smile and a glass of sherry. He had no idea that the Iron Lady was standing 3 feet behind him, wearing the dress he had told her to buy, and holding the purse of the wife he was trying to impress. He was looking for a grandmother, but he had brought the Grim Reaper with him as his +1. We had barely stepped off the red carpet and into the foyer when the atmosphere shifted. The polite murmur of the cocktail hour died down and the air grew heavy with a sudden palpable tension. I saw him first. It was the head of state security, a man named Marcus, trembling, who I had worked with on security detail for months. He was a mountain of a man, with a shaved head and an earpiece built like a tank and moving with the silent lethality of a predator. He was flanking a direct path through the crowd, ignoring the senators and the billionaires, his eyes locked on a specific target. He was coming straight for us. Brad froze his champagne glass, tilting dangerously in his hand. He went pale, the blood draining from his face as his mind raced back to the injunction and the potential criminal charges he was facing. He thought they had come for him. He thought the game was up. Beside him, Chantel let out a small, terrified squeak, clutching her husband's arm so hard her knuckles turned white. They looked like deer caught in the headlights of an oncoming semi-truck, paralyzed by their own guilt. But it was my mother, Bernice, whose reaction was the most visceral and the most telling. As Marcus and 2 other agents closed the distance, she did not step in front of her children to protect them. She did not ask what was happening. Instead, she turned on me with the ferocity of a trapped animal. She saw the authorities approaching, and her immediate instinct was to offer up a sacrifice to save herself. She grabbed my arm, her fingers digging into my flesh, and shoved me forward, stumbling slightly in her haste to create distance between us. "Officer!" she shrieked, her voice cracking with hysteria. drawing the attention of every person in the lobby. Whatever she did, we have nothing to do with it. She is just a distant relative, we barely know her. If she stole that dress or crashed this party, take her away. I told her not to come. I told her she did not belong here. I stumbled forward slightly from the force of her push, regaining my balance, just as Marcus stopped 2 feet in front of me. Bernice continued her frantic babbling, waving her hands as if trying to physically waft the scent of my alleged crimes away from her expensive perfume. She is a schoolteacher. She has no money. If she is in debt or in trouble with the law, that is her problem. Please do not associate us with her. We are the Brooks family. We are respectable people. I stood there straightening my spine, looking at my mother. She was panting, her eyes wide with panic, terrified that her carefully constructed image was about to be shattered by her daughter's imaginary incompetence. She had just disowned me in public for the second time in my life. The first time was via text message. This time it was in front of the city's elite. She had thrown me to the wolves without a second thought. I looked at Marcus, who was staring at Bernice with an expression of cold professional confusion. He did not reach for handcuffs. He did not pull a weapon. He simply looked from the hysterical woman to me, waiting for a command. I adjusted my glasses and looked back at my mother. You really should not have done that, Mom, I thought. You just made the reveal so much sweeter. Bernice was still hyperventilating and loudly declaring her innocence to the onlookers when Marcus finally moved. He did not reach for his radio. He did not signal for backup. And most importantly, he did not look at my mother. He simply stepped around her as if she were a minor inconvenience, like a potted plant placed in the wrong spot. He stopped directly in front of me and brought his heels together with a sharp military click. The chaotic noise of the foyer seemed to vanish as Marcus bowed his head slightly. It was not a gesture of intimidation. It was a gesture of profound respect. "Good evening, Ms. Wilson," Marcus said, his deep voice carrying clearly over the murmurs of the crowd. "I apologize for the delay. The governor is waiting for you in the private VIP suite. He wants to review the final amendments to your keynote speech before the broadcast begins. We have secured a private elevator for you so you do not have to deal with the press." The silence that followed was absolute. It was the kind of silence that happens when the laws of physics are suddenly broken. My mother stopped mid-sentence, her mouth hanging open in a perfect O shape. Chantel froze, her eyes darting back and forth between me and Marcus, as if trying to process a foreign language. But it was Brad whose reaction was the most satisfying. He looked like a man who had just watched gravity stop working. His brain was trying to reconcile the image of his pathetic sister-in-law with the scene playing out before him, and the cognitive dissonance was nearly causing him to stroke out. Brad took a stumbling step forward, his face flushed with a mix of anger and confusion. He reached out as if to stop Marcus, his arrogance overriding his survival instinct. "Wait, hold on a second, officer. There is a mistake here. A big mistake. You are confused. This is Simone. She is nobody. She is a kindergarten teacher. You are looking for S. Wilson, the guy from the zoning board, the old senator. You have the wrong girl." Marcus turned his head slowly to look at Brad. His expression was one of icy disdain. "I am not mistaken, sir," Marcus said, his voice flat and dangerous. "And I would advise you to lower your hand before I have you removed from the premises. I know exactly who I am speaking to. This is Senior Advisor Wilson, the author of the Public Education Protection Act, and she is the guest of honor tonight." Brad made a sound that was somewhere between a choke and a whimper. He looked at me, his eyes wide and pleading, begging me to tell him it was a prank. Begging me to be the failure he needed me to be. I simply adjusted my glasses and looked at him. I did not say a word. I did not need to. The terror dawning in his eyes said everything. He was finally realizing that the name on the bottom of the cease and desist order, the name that had haunted his nightmares for weeks, was standing right in front of him, holding his wife's purse. The teacher he had mocked was the judge he had to face. The silence in the foyer was a physical weight pressing down on the shoulders of the city's elite. Brad was still gaping like a fish out of water, his brain short-circuiting as he tried to reconcile the sister-in-law he bullied with the political titan standing before him. I slowly reached up and hooked my finger under the rim of my oversized sunglasses. I pulled them off, revealing eyes that were not red from crying or wide with fear, but cold, clear, and focused. I looked at Brad, then at Chantel, and finally settled my gaze on Bernice. My mother was still trembling, her hands hovering in the air, where she had just pushed me away. I looked down at the heavy, sequined clutch bag Chantel had forced me to carry. It sparkled under the chandelier light, a symbol of their gaudy, hollow lifestyle. I took a step toward Bernice. She flinched, expecting an outburst, perhaps a scream. Instead, I extended my arm and pressed the bag firmly into her chest. She grabbed it by reflex, clutching it awkwardly against her designer coat. "Hold this for me, Mother," I said, my voice low, but projecting with the effortless authority of someone used to commanding rooms. "You were right about one thing. I do not belong out here with the spectators. I have work to do." I did not wait for a response. I turned my back on them, a simple movement that felt like severing an anchor chain. I nodded to Marcus, who immediately stepped aside, gesturing toward the velvet rope that separated the general admission lobby from the secure VIP corridor. Two uniformed guards who had been standing like statues snapped to attention. One of them unhooked the heavy red rope, creating a path for me. As I stepped across the threshold, the transformation was complete. I was no longer Simone, the poor relation. I was S. Wilson, the architect of their demise. A young aide with a clipboard rushed forward, bowing her head respectfully. "Good evening, Advisor Wilson," the aide said breathlessly. "The governor is eager to see you. We have your microphone prepped in the green room." I walked past her, my heels clicking rhythmically on the marble. Behind me, I heard the scuffle of desperate movement. Brad had snapped out of his stupor. He lunged forward, trying to follow me through the opening. "Simone, wait!" he shouted, his voice cracking with panic. "Simone, you cannot just leave us here. We are with you. Tell them we are family." I did not turn around. I did not need to. I heard the sharp, definitive sound of the velvet rope being hooked back into place. I heard Marcus's deep baritone voice cutting off Brad's advance. "Step back, sir." "This area is for authorized government officials and keynote speakers only. Your tickets are for the General Assembly. You can find your seats in the back row." The back row. The words echoed in the corridor as I walked away. I could picture them standing there, Bernice holding the tacky bag, Chantel, realizing she had treated the most powerful woman in the room like a maid, and Brad watching his last hope for salvation walk away from him. They were on the outside, looking in exactly where they had tried to put me for my entire life. I stepped into the waiting elevator, and the doors slid shut, sealing me in the quiet luxury of success and leaving them in the noisy chaos of their own making. The lights in the grand ballroom dimmed, plunging the sea of tuxedos and gowns into a hushed anticipation. A single beam of white light cut through the darkness, illuminating the podium where Governor Harrison stood. He looked every bit the statesman, commanding the room with a gravity that made the champagne glasses stop clinking. Far in the back of the room, squeezed near the exit doors where the overflow seating was located, Brad, Chantel, and Bernice stood in the shadows. They were stripped of their VIP status, forced to crane their necks just to see the stage. Brad was sweating profusely, his earlier arrogance replaced by a nausea that churned in his gut. He gripped the back of the chair in front of him, praying that this was all a hallucination. Governor Harrison leaned into the microphone, his voice booming through the state-of-the-art sound system. "Ladies and gentlemen, tonight we celebrate education, but we also celebrate courage. For too long, our city's development has been dictated by profit margins rather than human value. We have seen developers who view our schools not as sanctuaries for our children, but as obstacles to their real estate portfolios. They thought they could buy their way through regulations. They thought they could bully their way through the law." Brad flinched as if physically struck. The governor was talking about him. The entire room seemed to nod in agreement, a collective condemnation of the very business practices Brad had bragged about at the dinner table. The governor continued, his voice rising with passion, but they were stopped. They were stopped because one woman had the vision to draft a law so ironclad that no amount of bribery could penetrate it. She sat in the back of committee meetings, ignored and underestimated, writing the Public Education Protection Act word by word. She stood up against the fiercest lobbyists in the state to ensure that our vulnerable students would never be displaced for a parking lot. Chantel grabbed Brad's arm, her fingernails digging into his sleeve. "Brad," she whispered, her voice trembling. "He is talking about PEPA. He is talking about the law that shut us down." The governor smiled, looking toward the stage wings. "It is my distinct honor to introduce the chief architect of this legislation, a woman who serves as my senior advisor and the moral compass of this administration. She rejected the greed of the Skyline Heights project to save Lincoln Elementary. Please welcome the woman you know as S. Wilson, but whom I am proud to call Simone Wilson." The name rang out like a gunshot. The applause that followed was deafening, a thunderous roar of approval from the city's most powerful people. The orchestra swelled, playing a triumphant anthem. From the darkness of the stage right wing, a figure emerged. It was not the hunched, quiet girl who washed dishes at family parties. It was a queen. Simone stepped into the blinding column of the spotlight. The midnight blue silk of her gown caught the light, shimmering like armor. She walked with a slow, deliberate cadence, her head held high, her expression calm and unyielding. She did not wave frantically. She simply walked to the center of the stage and stood there, absorbing the applause that she had earned with her silence and her pen. As she looked out into the blinding light, she wasn't just accepting an accolade. She was standing on the mountaintop, looking down at the people who had tried to bury her, showing them that they had only helped her grow. I gripped the edges of the polished wooden podium, and the coolness of the timber grounded me. The applause had faded into a respectful silence, a heavy blanket of anticipation that covered the room. The spotlight was blinding, a wall of white heat that separated me from the rest of the world. But I did not need to see the audience to know where my targets were. I knew exactly where the overflow section was. I looked past the senators in the front row, past the investors in the middle, and locked my gaze on the darkness at the very back of the hall. I found them. Brad looked like a ghost, Chantel was trembling, and my mother Bernice stood frozen, her mouth slightly ajar. We live in a city where some believe that net worth determines human worth. I began, my voice steady and amplified, filling every corner of the ballroom. There are those who believe that the law is merely a suggestion for the wealthy and a shackle for the poor. They look at our schools and see real estate. They look at our teachers and see failures. They mistake silence for submission, and they mistake kindness for weakness. I paused, letting the words hang in the air. I saw Brad flinch in the shadows. He knew I was speaking to him. He knew I was reciting the lessons he had taught me, not with love, but with cruelty. "But tonight I am here to correct that record," I continued, my voice rising with authority. "I am here to prove that integrity is a currency that cannot be devalued." Earlier this week, a prominent developer attempted to bypass the Public Education Protection Act. They used intimidation and bribery to secure what they believed was a waiver of consent from the faculty of Lincoln Elementary. I reached into the leather folder on the podium and pulled out the single sheet of paper. It was the document Bernice had forced me to sign. I held it up, the paper stark white against the dark blue of my gown. Brad let out a visible gasp, his hand flying to his mouth. He recognized the page. He thought he had won. "They submitted this document expecting it to be their permission slip to destroy a community," I said, turning the paper so the camera crews could capture it. However, they failed to read the fine print. Next to the signature is a reference code. Section 12B. Under the legislation, I wrote, Section 12B stands for immediate rejection due to coercion and attempted fraud. A collective gasp rippled through the room. I looked directly at Brad, my eyes cold and unforgiving. By submitting this document, the developer did not clear the way for construction. They signed a confession. Therefore, effective immediately, I am exercising my authority as senior advisor. The Skyline Heights project is officially and permanently rejected. The land will remain under the protection of the school district, and any further attempts to develop on that site will be met with federal prosecution. I lowered the paper and looked at my family one last time. The project is dead, and so is the era of your impunity. The silence that followed my declaration was shattered, not by applause, but by the heavy, ominous thud of the main ballroom doors swinging open. The sound was violent and authoritative, echoing off the high ceilings like a gavel strike. 6 officers in tactical vests, emblazoned with Economic Crimes Unit, marched into the room. They did not look at the governor. They did not look at me. They moved with the synchronized precision of a pack of wolves closing in on a wounded animal, cutting a direct path through the stunned crowd toward the back of the room. I stood motionless on the stage, gripping the sides of the podium, watching the scene unfold with a detached sense of finality. The guests in their tuxedos and gowns parted like the Red Sea, gasping and whispering as the officers converged on the overflow section. I saw Brad try to shrink back into the shadows to hide behind the wife he treated like a trophy, but there was nowhere left to run. Bradley Brooks, the lead officer, barked, his voice projecting clearly without a microphone. "You are under arrest." Brad's face turned a color I had never seen before, a sickly mix of gray and green. He stammered, his hands shaking as he held them up in a pathetic gesture of surrender. "Arrest? For what? This is a mistake. I am a businessman. I have rights." The officer stepped forward, grabbing Brad's wrist and twisting it behind his back with practiced efficiency. "You are being charged with federal document fraud, forgery, and the attempted corruption of a public official. We have evidence that you submitted a falsified community consensus waiver to the city zoning board this morning." Brad screamed as the cold steel of the handcuffs clicked shut around his wrists. It was a sharp mechanical sound that seemed to signify the end of his life as he knew it. "I did not falsify anything," he yelled, looking frantically around the room for an ally. "Simone signed it. She signed the waiver. Ask her. She is right there." The officer spun Brad around, forcing him to face the stage, forcing him to look at me. "She signed a rejection, Brad," the officer said, his tone mocking. "But our forensics team found traces of digital alteration on the file you uploaded. You tried to erase the Section 12B reference code she wrote. You tried to white out a federal rejection order to pass it off as an approval. That is a felony carrying a minimum sentence of 10 years. The realization hit Brad like a physical blow. His knees buckled and the officers had to physically hold him up. He looked up at me, his eyes wide with betrayal and horror. He finally understood. I had not just rejected his project. I had handed him a loaded gun, knowing his arrogance would make him pull the trigger. I knew he would not read the code. I knew he would try to cheat because cheating was the only way he knew how to win. I had not forced him to commit a crime. I had simply given him the opportunity, and he had taken it. Chantel began to scream, a high-pitched wail of pure selfishness, realizing her credit cards were about to be frozen. Bernice collapsed into a chair, fanning herself and sobbing about her reputation. But I did not look at them. I kept my eyes locked on Brad as the officers began to drag him toward the exit. As he passed the rows of silent judging elites, the very people he had desperately tried to impress, he looked small. He looked cheap. And for the first time in his life, he looked exactly like what he was, a criminal. I watched until the heavy doors swallowed him whole, leaving only the echo of his disgrace behind. Justice, I realized, did not need to shout. It just needed to wait. The chaos in the ballroom spilled out onto the grand staircase of the hotel. The air, previously filled with the scent of expensive perfume and anticipation, now reeked of scandal. While the guests whispered behind their manicured hands, federal agents moved with swift brutality to dismantle the Brooks empire in real time. I walked calmly toward the exit, my security detail flanking me, But I stopped when I heard the shrill familiar sound of my sister's voice, fracturing into hysteria. Chantel was standing at the valet stand, her face a mask of smudged mascara and pure terror. A federal marshal was standing between her and the sleek black Bentley they had arrived in. I watched as the marshal handed her a piece of paper instead of her keys, Mrs. Brooks, pursuant to the federal indictment, all assets registered to the Brooks Development Group and its primary shareholders have been frozen effective immediately. This vehicle is now government property. You will need to find alternative transportation. Chantel looked at the car, then at the marshal, and finally let out a scream that sounded like a glass window shattering. My car. You cannot take my car. How am I supposed to get home? I am wearing a $5,000 dress. The marshal simply crossed his arms, unmoved by her tantrum. To him, she was just another broke socialite. Then she saw me. I was standing near the waiting government SUV, the engine idling softly. Chantel's eyes locked onto mine, and the shock in her face twisted into a feral rage. She hitched up her heavy gold-sequined skirt and ran toward me, her heels clicking frantically on the pavement. She looked like a fallen angel, her feathers ruffled, and her crown slipping. She lunged at me, ignoring the security guards who stepped forward to intercept her. "You!" she screamed, her voice raw and ugly. "You did this! You planned this whole thing!" She pointed a shaking finger at my face, her chest heaving. You knew Brad would try to fix the paperwork. You set him up. You ruined us, Simone. We have nothing. The house, the accounts, the cars. It is all gone because of you." She grabbed my arm, her grip desperate and painful. "You are a monster. How could you do this to your own flesh and blood? You are cold-blooded, Simone. You are absolutely heartless." I looked down at her hand, clutching my silk sleeve. It was the hand of a woman who had never worked a day in her life, a woman who had watched me scrub her floors and laughed. I gently but firmly peeled her fingers off my arm, pushing her back just enough to create a boundary she could no longer cross. I adjusted my shawl, the night breeze feeling cool against my skin. I looked her dead in the eye, my expression devoid of the pity she was fishing for. "You are right, Chantel," I said, my voice calm and razor-sharp. "I am cold-blooded, but I did not start out that way. I used to be warm, I used to be soft. But then I spent 20 years living in a house where kindness was treated as a defect, and love was conditional on a bank balance." I stepped closer to her, lowering my voice, so only she could hear the final verdict. "You taught me that emotions are a liability. You taught me that only the strong survive. So do not blame me for being a monster sister. I am simply the reflection of the family that raised me." I turned and opened the car door, leaving her standing on the sidewalk shivering in her gold dress with no ride, no money, and no one left to blame but herself. The flashing blue lights of the police cruisers bounced off the wet pavement, creating a strobe light effect on my mother's face. Bernice stood a few feet away from the sobbing heap that was Chantel watching the tow truck hook up the Bentley. I watched her eyes dart back and forth, calculating the damage. She looked at Brad being shoved into the squad car. Then she looked at Chantel, who was currently hysterical and destitute. Finally, her gaze landed on me standing next to the black government SUV, with a security detail waiting for my command. In that split second, I saw the gears turn in her head. Bernice was a survivor. She was a parasite who needed a host, and she had just realized that her old host was dead. She smoothed the front of her coat, wiped the fake concern for Brad off her face, and replaced it with a smile so sickeningly sweet it made my teeth ache. She stepped over the train of Chantel's dress, ignoring her other daughter's cries, and walked toward me with open arms. "Simone, baby," she cooed, her voice trembling with a manufactured emotion that I had not heard in decades. "Oh, look at you. My powerful, brilliant girl. I knew it. I knew you were special." She reached out as if to cup my face, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Do not listen to your sister. She is just upset. She does not understand the complexities of the world like we do. I stood frozen watching this performance with a mixture of awe and disgust. 10 minutes ago, inside the lobby, she had practically offered to drive the police car to take me to jail. Now she was looking at me like I was the second coming. Bernice continued, oblivious to my stony silence. You have to understand, sweetheart, everything I did was for you. The tough love, the criticism, the pressure, it was all a test. I had to push you down so you would learn how to stand up. I had to be hard on you so you would become this warrior. And look, it worked. You are the governor's right-hand woman. You are the success story I always dreamed of. She lunged forward, then spreading her arms wide for a hug intended to seal this new alliance. Come here. Give your mother a squeeze. Let's go get some champagne and celebrate your victory. We have so much to discuss. I am sure the governor needs a woman of my social standing to help organize his next fundraiser. We are going to be such a team, Simone. She was inches away from me when I moved. I did not step into her embrace. I took a sharp, deliberate step backward. The distance between us felt like a canyon. I raised my hand, palm out, fingers spread in the universal sign to stop. It was a rigid, unyielding barrier. Bernice froze mid-stride, her arms still open, her smile faltering at the edges. Do not touch me, I said, my voice low and devoid of any warmth. Do not take another step. Bernice blinked, looking confused, as if I had spoken in a foreign tongue. Simone, do not be silly. It is me. It is Mommy. We are family. I looked at her hand, the same hand that had slapped me when I was a child, the same hand that had signed checks for Brad's fraud. I lowered my hand slowly, but kept my gaze locked on hers. The test is over, Bernice, I said coldly. And you failed. You bet on the wrong horse. You chose the gold watch and the Bentley. You do not get to switch sides just because the ship is sinking. You wanted a successful child, well, you have one, but you do not have a daughter anymore. I turned toward the open door of the SUV, leaving her standing there with her arms hugging nothing but the empty, cold night air. The interior of the government SUV was a sanctuary of silence and dark leather. The heavy door thudded shut with a reassuring solidity, sealing out the chaos of the street, the flashing police lights and the shrill sound of Chantel screaming at a parking valet. For a moment I just sat there, letting the quiet wash over me. Marcus, the head of security, slid into the front passenger seat and glanced back at me in the rearview mirror, waiting for the order to move. But I was not quite finished. There was one last loose end to cut. I looked out the tinted window. My mother, Bernice, was standing on the curb. She looked small and desperate, clutching her coat around her, her makeup running in streaks down her face. She was staring at the black glass, searching for a glimpse of me, searching for a lifeline. She took a step toward the car, her hand reaching out to touch the handle. She thought she could still charm her way in. She thought that biology was a get-out-of-jail-free card. I pressed the button on the armrest. The window slid down with a smooth electric hum. Bernice's face lit up with a frantic, terrifying hope. She rushed forward, gripping the doorframe with claw-like fingers. Simone, she gasped, her breath hitching. Thank God. I knew you would not leave me here with these people. Open the door, baby. Let's go home. We can talk about this. We can fix everything. I sat perfectly still, my hands folded in my lap. I did not unlock the door. I simply turned my head and looked at her. I looked at the woman who had criticized my weight, my clothes, and my career for 30 years. I looked at the woman who had watched me drown and asked why I was getting the water wet. Mrs. Wilson, I said. The use of her formal name hit her like a physical slap. She flinched, pulling back slightly. Simone, what are you? You disowned me 5 years ago. I said, my voice calm and steady, cutting through her stammering. You removed me from the family trust and blocked my number because I told you I could not afford to buy a table at your charity luncheon. You told me that poverty was a disease and you did not want to catch it. You told me that I was a stain on the family image. Bernice opened her mouth to argue, to spin some new lie, But I silenced her with a look. Well, congratulations, I continued. You do not have to worry about my poverty anymore. I am rich, Bernice. I am wealthy in power, wealthy in influence. And yes, I am wealthy in money. But here is the reality check you desperately need. Now that I am rich, I realized something. I do not need you either. I saw the light go out in her eyes. The realization finally settled in. This was not a negotiation. This was a funeral for our relationship. Do not call me, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that was louder than a scream. Do not come to my office. Do not tell the press we are estranged. If you try to contact me, I will have a restraining order on your desk within the hour. Figure it out, Bernice. You are a survivor, right? Prove it. I pressed the button. The window began to rise. Bernice screamed my name, lunging forward, but the black glass slid shut, sealing her out of my world forever. I tapped on the partition. Drive, Marcus. The engine purred to life, and the car pulled away from the curb. I did not look back. I watched the city lights blur past the window, feeling lighter with every mile that put distance between me and the people who made me. They were in my rear-view mirror now, exactly where they belonged. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of freedom. The future was wide open, and for the first time in my life, it was entirely mine. The sunlight hit the new glass facade of the Lincoln Community Center, reflecting a brilliance that Brad's luxury towers never could have achieved. It had been 12 months since the gala, 12 months since the investigation dismantled the Brooks Development Group, and 12 months since I walked away from the wreckage of my biological family. The site that was once destined to be a soulless mall was now a state-of-the-art campus for special needs education. I stood by the entrance, running my hand over the bronze plaque bolted to the brickwork. It did not bear my name. It read the Lincoln Promise, funded by the Public Education Protection Initiative. Good morning, Principal Wilson, a young voice called out. I turned to see Leo, the college student who used to drive for Uber, now wearing a lanyard with the school logo. He was my new administrative coordinator. I smiled, adjusting the lapel of my blazer. It is Honorary Principal Leo. Do not make me feel old. I am just here to cut the turkey. The scene shifted to my apartment later that evening. It was no longer the lonely, quiet space my mother had sneered at. It was alive. The air was thick with the smell of roasted sage stuffing, and cranberry sauce. Around my dining table sat 12 people. There was Mr. Henderson, the chess coach. There was Miss Higgins, the clerk from the zoning board who had helped me track Brad's fraud. There were teachers, social workers, and friends who had stood by me when I had nothing. There was no crystal. There were no gold watches. There was only mismatched china and laughter that came from the belly, not the throat. I stood up, raising a glass of apple cider. The room went quiet, not out of fear, but out of love. To the family we choose, I said, my voice thick with emotion. To the people who see us when we are invisible and stand by us when we are loud. Thank you for being my home. Glasses clinked and the room erupted in cheers. I sat back down, feeling a warmth that no amount of money could buy. My phone sat on the table next to my plate. It buzzed once, vibrating against the wood. I glanced at it casually, expecting a holiday greeting from the governor. The screen lit up with a notification from an unknown number. The preview message scrolled across the locked screen. Simone, it is Mommy. Please pick up. We are living in a motel on 4th Street. Chantel had to sell her jewelry. We have nothing to eat for Thanksgiving. Just send us a little cash. We learned our lesson. Please, baby. We are family. The room around me blurred for a second. I looked at the words. They were still trying. Even from the bottom of the pit they had dug for themselves, they were still trying to pull me in. They were still using guilt as a currency, but the bank was closed. I did not feel anger. I did not feel sadness. I looked at the message with the detachment of a stranger reading a spam email. I picked up the phone. I did not reply. I did not screenshot it. I simply tapped the small icon in the corner. Block caller. The message vanished. The number disappeared. The screen went black, reflecting my smiling face. I set the phone face down on the table and turned back to Mr. Henderson, who was asking for the potatoes. I am sorry Simone was that important, he asked. I smiled, picking up the serving bowl. No, I said, passing the food to the people who actually loved me. It was just a wrong number. The end. The most profound lesson from the story of Simone Wilson is that true power does not roar, it whispers. Throughout the narrative, the Brooks family operated under the fatal misconception that net worth equals human worth. They believed that their money bought them immunity from consequences, and that Simone's silence was a symptom of weakness. They failed to realize that the most dangerous person in the room is not the one shouting for attention, but the one quietly observing, documenting, and preparing. Simone teaches us that integrity is a long game. While her family was focused on the short-term gratification of humiliation and greed, Simone was building a foundation of competence and legal authority. Furthermore, the story serves as a powerful manifesto on the definition of family. For years, Simone allowed herself to be a doormat because she subscribed to the toxic belief that shared DNA requires unconditional tolerance of abuse. Her final transformation is not just about financial success or political revenge. It is about the emotional liberation of realizing that access to your life is a privilege, not a birthright. By choosing a Thanksgiving dinner with colleagues who respected her over a biological family who exploited her, Simone demonstrates that family is a title earned through love and support, not inherited. The story reminds us that we have the agency to edit the cast of our lives, to reject the role of the victim, and to understand that sometimes the healthiest response to toxicity is not an argument, but a permanently closed door. If Simone's journey of claiming her self-worth resonated with you, hit the like button and share this story with someone who needs a reminder that their dignity is not for sale.